All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started this morning. Hello to everyone. I'm Laurel Hansen I'm from MACC's program manager, and I'm joined by my co-moderator, Clara Owen, who is MACC's communications director. And I just want to thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate being here with all of you. Before we start this morning, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge some heavy things that are weighing on all of us and all of our minds right now. We know that there has been unrest, and cops shot Jacob Blake 7 times in the back because he stopped to break up a fight. It was a 17-year-old white supremacist who killed 2 peaceful protesters and injured another. There's a Category 4 hurricane that's bearing down on Louisiana and Texas. And here in Minneapolis, a man's suicide has reignited some distrust and some trauma and some violence by reopening some fresh and deep wounds. And it is a lot to take in. We didn't want to dive into this morning's topic without acknowledging this heavy reality. And we know that everyone is working through this. And we know that how we talk about these events and racial justice issues with our staff and our communities, and also, yes, our funders and our donors, it really does matter a lot. And that's not the specific topic of this morning's conversation, but it is certainly one of the big areas where we know members have had to adapt and shift messaging, and everyone has been working really hard on this. And so even though as we keep everything in our minds and hearts, we are going to jump into this morning's conversation, and that's why we just really appreciate everyone who could be here with us today in solidarity. So thank you again very much. And it's going to be my pleasure to introduce an amazing panel this morning. But first, I do want to just introduce this topic, step back, and sort of frame where we're coming from today and what this series of Zooms has been about. This is MACC Zooms In on engaging donors and community partners online. This convening, it does continue a series of Zoom sessions that we've been bringing members together during the COVID crisis. We listen to our members, and we are trying very hard to convene them around the things that matter to them most. While each of our members has a distinct voice in the community, we think the MACC network is united by the belief that we can have a greater impact when we partner and collaborate together. A greater impact to achieve greater equality for everyone that we serve. And so on behalf of the MACC network, we again really do thank you for being here. Before we get started and meet our panel, I do want to just share a few directions for participating on Zoom this morning. We've been loving this Zoom platform, and we know that there are a lot of great and easy ways to use the Zoom platform and to make this a conversation. I want to mention we're recording the session, and if all goes well, we'll be able to share that with you afterwards. You can participate by using the chat window. Everyone knows about that. The Q&A window is where you can put your questions for the panel. And if you like to share your comments and questions verbally, you can raise your hand in the participant window. And Claire, I'd love to go back to that introductory panel because there's just so many great organizations who registered for today's event. I was just so excited every time a registration notice would come through because it's an amazing, amazing group of members. Time won't allow us for everyone to introduce themselves, but I just want to give some exposure to what this MACC network really looks like when people show up together. And also, I just want to suggest the chat window is there. If you want to introduce yourself, feel free. Go ahead and jump in the chat window and do that. So thank you again for everyone for being here. We want the panel to get to know you a little bit though. So we've posed 3 poll questions, and this is interactive. And so we want, Claire's gonna launch some polls, a series of 3 poll questions. We want you to respond to them, and then she will share the results. So let's go ahead and get started with the first poll question. So this is the what have you done question. We wanna know what, if you have already adapted your fundraising to the virtual world, especially since COVID started. So go ahead and answer that question, and then we'll share the results. All right, looks like a great number of you have already started to adapt. All right, question number 2. Question number 2, do you expect to do more virtual fundraising in the future, even beyond the COVID crisis? A lot of affirmatives there. I think we're pretty comfortable that everyone's thinking, almost everyone is thinking it's a virtual world. A lot of you are. And then we have a final third poll question for you to respond to. Are you personally currently working on doing a virtual donor event? And there's a nice mix there. We'll show the results. Some people currently doing it, and maybe some people thinking about doing it. Thanks, Clara, for sharing those polls, and thanks for everyone for responding to them. It's interesting to see where we're all at. All right, well, now it is my pleasure to introduce the panelists. I'm going to do that right now. Brianna Miller is the Advancement Director at PRISM. And Brianna has more than 10 years of executive and leadership experience in multi-service human services organizations and educational institutions. Before her time at PRISM, she led another MACC member, Phyllis Wheatley, and she has a strong understanding of culturally specific and trauma-informed services and care, and is completing her master's degree in nonprofit leadership. Thank you, Brianna, for being here. Kit Bream, the Vice President of Advancement at the Family Partnership. Kit's responsible for cultivating resources to deepen the organization's impact and to position the Family Partnership for sustainability. She's raised funds for the Twin Cities social service, art, and philanthropic communities for more than 25 years. And I have a great quote from her. Philanthropy is a blend of science and art. Metrics and research are important, but what makes a difference is listening deeply to donors. Kit has a MA in Arts Administration and an MBA from the University of Wisconsin. Welcome, Kit. Next, we have Lori Walker, who's the Corporate Relationships and Events Manager at Interfaith Outreach and Community Partners. And prior to her work at Interfaith Outreach, Lori helped open Gilda's Club of the Twin Cities, awesome organization that does cancer support, serving as the advancement director there, and then also has worked in for-profit marketing and communications. Hello, Lori. Mary Anstedt is the Senior Advancement Officer at Eastside Neighborhood Services. Mary's been working in the Twin Cities nonprofit sector for over 20 years with experience in event planning, volunteer recruitment and management, community relations, and aspects of development department management. Interesting, she also co-owns a photography company and is an avid gardener and traveler and super fun lady. Welcome, Mary. Sue Riesgraf is the Development and Marketing Director at Banyan Community. Sue spent the first half of her career in the for-profit sector, building a base of solid business and marketing expertise. She answered the call to the mission-focused work and has spent the second half of her career translating those skills to development of community in the nonprofit sector. In the last 6 years, she's been with Banyan Community, identifying and cultivating donor relationships. So I want to welcome all of you, and good to see you today, and I want to thank you for joining us in this discussion. And as a reminder to all of the attendees, everyone who's joined us today, this is a conversation, and we know there's a lot of interesting information in the audience. We know there's a lot of expertise around the large table here today, so take advantage of that chat room, the Q&A window, and raising your hand, because we do want to hear from you as well. All right, so we want to start with some questions that take us down the path of talking about donor relationships in the time of COVID. And we know that this has not been easy. So I've got some questions. We're going to sort of popcorn style it, and I'll shout out to some of you with some specific questions. But please do, panelists, jump in where you would like to answer and share as well. So, Brianna, if it's okay, I'd love to start with you.
Excellent.
I'd love to hear from you at PRISM. What changes have you observed with your donor relationships there?
Well, we're a little unique. A lot of our donors are volunteers, and our volunteer population is aging out. So one of the things that has changed now that we've shifted virtual, what does volunteering look like? What does giving look like? How do we bring in younger people? Let's target some millennials. What's their giving pattern? What's their volunteering pattern? And so how we've shifted is really we've done a full 180, if you will, and developing new and creative strategies for how we get to engage the younger population, as well as maintaining our current donors and volunteers. So our shift has really been toward a new population. So that's kind of how we've done shifting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I would imagine that folks are seeing a lot of those changes demographically and in engagement levels. Kit, I have a feeling you can tell us a little bit about adapting older strategies at the family partnership. Want to jump in and give us a little bit on that? And unmute yourself.
We have a bingo card going. So, in some ways, nothing has changed because donor relations remains that. It remains relational. In some ways, it's easier. We're not having to deal with logistics of meeting people for lunch or coffee. In some ways, scheduling is easier. But our old strategy, we had one big fundraiser. We used the Raising More Money model. We had one luncheon in May, and literally 2 weeks, at one point in March, 2 weeks before the COVID shutdown, Brian Kimmis, all credit goes to him, he said, maybe we should think about going virtual and just to problem solve it and plan. And I'm like, Brian, no, we'll be fine. And about a week later, we were fully in that mode. And Brian and his team pivoted very quickly. We kept the same format. We had table captains. We kept the day, that is our space, first Tuesday of May. We shortened the program and we totally pre-recorded it. We wanted total control over the message. We did a Zoom pre-tape, so we did a run through. So it felt live because people were coming in and out, and we did the chat. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't Zoom, it was YouTube. But what we taped was a Zoom piece. We did chat to try to keep it lively. I think the audience appreciated that it was short and tight. And we did it 3 times. And I stole that. I forget who broadcast first 3 times. We were agonizing over, do we keep it at the noon hour? Do we move it to 7? So we did noon, 4:30, and 7. And the results were fascinating. We technically brought in more money than a usual luncheon, but the difference was major gift donors who gave early. So really, the event brought in about what it normally brings in, but we had the commitments from people who normally give in December. We had fewer people register, but we had more views. Now, I watched it 3 times because I attended all 3 sessions, so that's a little skewed.
Sure.
The most concerning thing for us, well, the good news was we had more lapsed donors return, but we had a plummet in the number of new donors. And that is concerning for the long-term health. We had more new donor money because board members could invite their friends from all over the country. So we had the new donors who were there could give pretty generously. Are they sustainable?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So we're turning to a house party for this fall that's not an Ask event, that is about trying to bring new donors to the family partnership, working our network of former board volunteers to bring 2, 3, 4, 5 friends to that. So that's, and I can go into more detail on that later, but.
No, then that's interesting. So you took your previous event model, you moved it onto Zoom, you taped it, you put it onto YouTube, and then you showed it, like broadcast it 3 different times.
Correct.
I mean, I think that's just a really interesting approach. And then like the different times of the day, did that feel a little bit like A/B testing, where you could see like which time slot and the different demographics that you wanted, and just, I mean, the potential for information there is pretty high.
Yeah, and I'm nothing if not, I don't know if it's lazy or efficient, but I'm like, let's get rid of one of them. But it was fascinating. Noon was clearly the biggest, but
Okay.
7 p.m. brought in a whole, it was a smaller group, but it was a whole group that we don't normally bring in, and a lot of California relatives.
No kidding.
And then at the 7 p.m. Yeah.
Well, so
Relatives
I recall
of staff and board.
I recall attending your event. I do remember it, and I thought the pacing was excellent. And when you mentioned that you tightened it up, or it was a shorter event, and I think you're probably taking into mind online attention spans. And
yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing. Panelist, is there another panelist who maybe wants to talk about an old strategy that they've had to adapt already during COVID?
I think for us, it was really rethinking our communications and how we are connecting with donors and the community at large. You know, people are more isolated now and working from home and having less people contact. So for us, it was really important to really take a look at how can we tell the stories of how all of our programs have pivoted, doing service delivery, and the positives that have come out of that. I mean, we've had more older adults tuning in and using, you know, computer platforms than ever before. We've been able to connect more deeply with families, helping them kind of maneuver through the online learning. So for us, it was really, communication is such a huge part and storytelling of what we do. But for us, it's like we really needed to like take a look at that and like not over communicate, but really be authentic with our communications with all of our constituents. That's how, so that's kind of where we like, you know, we communicate regularly, but how we really tried to change the way that looks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if any of you with donor relationships are trying anything brand new because of the COVID crisis.
I can answer that. One of the things Interfaith has done is we last year had launched a platform called Tour de Friends, and that was bringing in targeted groups, around 50 or so, to really hear the story of Interfaith. It was not an Ask event, it really was an informative event. Knowing that we can't do that, we quickly moved it to Zoom de Friends. And along with, we would have a once a month, the first Tuesday of the month, it was called First Tuesday, where we would bring people in the door, about 10 people over a lunch hour, again, pure information and introduction to Interfaith, really that opening the door of cultivation. And those two came together, and we now do a Zoom de Friends, and we invite people in, and it could be one person or it could be a group of 5 or 10 people who participate in a very similar platform and experience, except that it's done over Zoom. The other thing that we found to be really critical is having some really good stories on film. And so we also quickly took and filmed our program director and a few other individuals, as well as some of our client stories, to be able to have what I'm going to call that B-roll available, to be able to utilize that, for example, during our Zoom to Friends and some of our e-marketing and things of that nature, to get it out of just what I'm going to call the two-dimensional static communication, but really utilizing multimedia to get in front of people, which I think is important. You know, there's nothing more engaging to a viewer and to a potential donor than to see a client share their story. I think that's a critical piece that we all have to take a look at. And then back to the communication side of things, the one thing that we have been measuring a bit is to take a look at, because our frequency of communicating has increased via what I'd call email marketing. And we have had a little concern that, are we over communicating, or are people starting to step away from viewing those communications? And actually, we have not seen that to be the case, which I think is really important to know. And continuing that communications, maybe making it a little bit more customized to that viewer audience, I think is important. But we're not seeing people stepping away. And actually, in some cases, we're actually finding it almost easier to get a hold of people as well. Because again, people don't have that option of being in the office and being distracted, and they seem to be picking up their phone when you call, which is wonderful.
Yeah, maybe people are craving a little more engagement due to some isolation that's occurring in their lives.
Exactly.
Yeah. And as long as it can be genuine and authentic and true to your story, I think that really resonates with people.
Yeah.
I want to second Lori's comment about BRoll and an efficiency thing we did when we put together the virtual luncheon, virtual event. We asked the editor to give us 90-second snippets while he was editing it so that it was ready to go. So we had those snippets to repurpose in email and social media.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to just also second that too, saying that being able to access some of your stuff that you maybe haven't used, you were kind of saving for something, and repurposing that and having that available from both a video standpoint for sure, but also just the stories and finding new and different ways to share those has been really impactful for us in connecting with donors. And again, I think people are just a little bit more available. They are a little bit more open. As you started this, we are experiencing a variety of crises in our world right now, which the philanthropic community is fully embracing. Donors want to know what's happening and want to be a part of solutions. So I think that has been a great impetus for us to be able to connect with people and to share kind of how we're responding and the work we're doing in these specific areas has been.
Yeah, that's great that you would bring that up, Lori. Sue, Sue, I have a question for you. Do you find that your organization is talking in any different or new ways with donors about your work?
I think we are. We are talking in different ways. Just the actual logistics of how we're doing it is different. People aren't coming in to see us anymore. We're not having lunch and coffee. Things are opening up a little bit. There are a number of donors who are comfortable meeting at a park or meeting in the parking lot at the coffee shop and doing. I've met several donors in my car. They're in their car. We roll our windows down and talk to each other. One parks forward, one parks backwards. And everybody's comfort level is different, but finding those opportunities to be in a way, in connecting with people, the phone or in person, socially distant, outside, safe, feels good.
Yeah.
And I think our message, this has really afforded us an opportunity to really tighten up our message and really be very focused on what's happening in our world today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our work is really very broad, and we do a lot of things in this community development space. So being able to really focus in on the education piece, that's a huge huge challenge right now. Focusing on community safety and community engagement, really being able to hone in on those has been something we've found to be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder too. I wonder if donors in the community see so many MACC members are essential frontline. Many never have closed and have required, and the demands on so many for basic needs especially have just skyrocketed. And I wonder if that's really connecting with donors and sort of incenting them to step forward at this very critical time.
I think one thing that I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but it's really very interesting to me is our corporations, foundations, funders have really shifted to wanting to support general operating and really allowing nonprofits to do to use the funding to do what you need to do. Having that confidence and really making that shift, which has been amazing. But on the flip side, we've also noticed some of our individual donors have gone the other way and are wanting to ensure that their money is for basic services, for really trying to narrow down their funding, which is an interesting shift for us. We have not seen that before. So we're very grateful on the corporate and foundation side for the flexibility, but we're feeling a little bit of the push on the individual donor side.
Yeah. Is anyone else experiencing that? A narrowing of how individual donors are reacting?
Not a narrowing for us necessarily at Prism, but another piece that Sue mentioned was just like we've had an exponential explosion. Prism is at a different place now, and we've been meeting and exceeding our fundraising goals for the last few years. And once things started with COVID, our supporters who already support us because we are serving vulnerable populations are even supporting us more. But that is an example of how we've had to tighten up our message because we've had to say it to them differently. And I'll just give you an example. We've had to change our service model. So we have shifted from a choice model in our food shelf where families can come in and shop for themselves to now there's a drive-up model where we're putting food into their vehicles and they stay safely inside. Well, now we have to reinterpret everything that we do and continue to, justify the need. I mean, our numbers are 400 or 500 visits higher than we were last year for a consistent 6 months or so. And so we've just exploded in many ways, which we are grateful for and beneficial for because our
are donors responding to that reality? Your supporters?
Yes, absolutely. And so this is where we have seen some shrinkage with our larger donors. They want to then allocate certain portions to food, for example, because of how we've shifted that model. Yeah, so it's really been an interesting look at how, even though times are getting more challenging, this is when our donors specifically are really coming together and donating more than we've seen.
Well, that's encouraging.
Trisha asked a question here
Mhm.
about do we have concerns about retaining them? Well, this would be another piece of our strategy that we are working on shifting is how do we retain those new donors? How do we keep donors at their certain giving levels? How do we grow those donors? And so we've had to be creative and digging a little bit deeper. Going into organizations who we may have partnered with or not, or may have different work that they do, but studying their boards a little bit to see what other passions boards might have outside of the work that's being done. And so, you know, we've had an opportunity to find a couple boards who within themselves really believe in food and really want people to eat. And it's completely different than what they do in their normal operations. But we've gained some support there as well. So we just are pivoting. We're pivoting at every moment. We aren't exactly sure what's happening. No one is sure what's happening. But we gotta try everything we possibly can and see then where's the hook.
Yeah, well, there's the quote for the day. Thank you, Brianna. That question that Tricia brought up is one that I had in mind as well. Have you, and maybe some of our other panelists can speak to this. Have you seen new donors and new fund partners who are engaging with you because this is an emergency situation we've been in? And then that retention question, what are your ideas for retaining them? Or are you, maybe you're assuming that you're unsure that you can? Does anyone else want to comment on that?
I can speak to that. We picked up about 200 new volunteers, or I'm sorry, new donors between the end of March and the end of May. Of those 200 plus new donors, I'd say 90+% of them came in online. So, I mean, it was definitely a shift for us. We typically, we've been around for 105 years. So we have a lot of donations that still come in through the mail and with wonderful personal notes and things like that. So this was a very unique kind of an unofficial campaign.
What were they responding to?
Well, we did put out, COVID emergency kind of funding needed. I have to agree with Brianna, our food programs just exploded with need. We have a metro food program that actually typically delivers to 50 plus low income older adult and disabled adult living complexes in Hennepin County. So of course we couldn't go to them anymore and lay out all the food. So we had to really shift. Going back really quickly to the question of how focused were those donations, I'd say most of the new donations that came in were Gen Op, and we were super grateful for that. And we did get, of the designated donating kind of forms that came in, those were mainly for food. So there was a big influx in food donations, but there was also a majority of the folks that were new donors to us actually just were able to just do Gen Op, which was really, really great for us. But I mean, that's how, when we shifted to our virtual event, which just happened on Thursday, I'm kind of still reeling from it, really did target many of those new donors with some targeted messaging, targeted thank yous, targeted, kind of wishing and hoping that they participate. And so we did see quite a few new names and faces as we pivoted to that virtual event. It's really exciting to see.
Yeah.
And that's a piece that's interesting, is the food piece. So I had existing donors because we serve two neighborhoods that were really impacted by the uprising. And we do not do a food program. We refer, we're a good partner that way. And some donors wanted us to be doing that. Some donors wanted us to be doing really boots on the ground organizing, neither of which is they're components and we partner with, but it's not our core work. So it's been interesting for us to navigate that. And I think that's why you guys are seeing a pop in new donors and we're not, because I think that pull to make sure basic needs are met is really high right now. And I think it's a distinction we need to be aware of as we talk to our donors and stay within our mission.
Yeah.
I just wanted to speak a little bit to what both Kit and Brianna were saying, and we're in the emergency needs area as well. So we did see that definite increase in donor activity, as COVID was really becoming a reality. We saw a pretty dramatic increase. And we did see both new donors and a lot of lapsed donors who had come back into the family, let's say. I think going back to the question about retaining those donors, and something that Interfaith had put in place before I joined them, which I think is really instrumental, is we have what we call Thankful Thursday. And on every Thursday, as a team, we all make phone calls, and we call donors who have donated within the last really 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what that time frame is. Hopefully, an even shorter period. And the other thing we did, which people are so grateful for those phone calls. Again, it's that personal touch. And I think it's a really, really important step. Now, granted, when your staff is small, it's really hard to be making all of those phone calls. Well, we did some board and development committee training, and it was very interesting. As soon as that training was complete, the number of people on those two the board and the committee, who stepped up and said, we would like to make phone calls. It's a way, and they're volunteers, and they're engaged volunteers. So it's really actually a super way to use your volunteer community, because right now, and I think, Brianna, you mentioned it, we can't have a lot of volunteers coming in the door of Interfaith. The numbers that we had, we've got 2,000 active volunteers, and the number of people we can actually have come through the door and help us as volunteers is always very limited. So we're engaging those volunteers in things that they can do, such as picking up the phone or helping to make appointments, things of that nature that they can do from their own personal home office, so to speak. So I think that going back to the old pick up the phone and call and thank people is incredibly critical right now.
I absolutely agree with that. Once we started getting more online donations, yes, I pulled in the board and I said, who's going to make phone calls? We did it wasn't like a full training, but some scripting and let them know, if they're a returning donor, if they're a new donor, if this is, a larger gift than what they gave before. But we did it for every gift that came in during a certain period of time, whether it was $10, whether it was, $5,000, the board chair would call on that larger amount or whatever. But what we did see, we used to have about 4 monthly, consistent donor giving. And we saw an explosion now. And I'm sorry I keep using that word, but I don't have another way to describe it. We're at, over 100 monthly donors now that have signed up in our online system. We get monthly donations from checks from, other donors, but that was amazing. And I would attribute that to some of those phone calls. So absolutely, definitely.
Steve shared an interesting example in chat about darts and how organizations are maybe partnering more now with other community friends and other organizations. Darts, that has a transportation arm, they reached out to local food shelves to use their buses to deliver groceries to isolated older adults. And I'm just wondering if any of your organizations have had any sort of new relationships that have developed in your community during COVID because of this emergency. Anything come to mind?
Well, I will say we have for sure partnered a lot more with the helping in the food distribution to our families. That's not in our regular work, but that was a huge need for our families. And so we really pivoted to that.
Yeah.
Our community team did a great job and was partnering with several local agencies to get things to families.
Yeah.
And particularly families, but also several of our older adults. So that, I mean, again, that's not part of our normal work.
Yeah.
So
It creates stories, though, stories that can reach out into the community. So it definitely.
I think the other thing that we've really partnered, back in the March-April timeframe was really, we do work closely with schools, but having to do so more and having to really help backfill some of those technology needs and some of the needs that were readily apparent with respect to access to Wi-Fi and internet, and really helping to navigate that. And so partnering with, we did a lot of work with Minnesota After School Advance, with Youth Prize, with a bunch of different organizations to really help fill that gap. So I would say some of our existing partnership relationships grew stronger.
Yeah, have deepened for sure.
And took a little bit different direction.
Yeah. A few of you have mentioned some new things you're doing. And gosh, I just think that the innovation that can come during difficult times is exciting and fascinating. And I'm just wondering if any of you have something new that you've done that you feel is innovative that you'd like to share, if you haven't already.
I can just, because our virtual event is so fresh on my mind, we really tried to pivot to a very unique format for a virtual event. I had seen so many of them in the last couple months, fell asleep during one with my phone on my chest. So I didn't want to emulate those types of programming. It's really hard to keep people engaged. We incorporated food and drink into our virtual event. So we partnered with 4 restaurants in the community and a couple of beverage companies that were obviously struggling during this time. So we partnered with them. When people bought tickets to our event, it included a food and a beverage kit, which then they just swung by our parking lot the night of the event to pick up. So it was a lot of coordination, but it was a really interesting and unique way to engage people. Just from my own personal experiences during this time, I mean, we've been picking up a lot of to-go food, trying to support local restaurants and save me from cooking every day. So it was really popular. We actually sold out, which we've never done. We've done a food and beverage event for 24 years, and this is the first time we've ever sold out of anything. Also, our board members, we had 100% participation for the first time.
Wow.
In history with the organization. We had 100% of board that participated in this event. So to us, it was a huge success, and the money was okay. I mean, we did really well, about as we would have done at a in-person event. So we were really pleased with that. But it was just we tried to keep it interesting and unique, and it was a lot of work on our end, but it made, and when you're thinking, oh, all of our constituents watching are, they've had cocktails or wine or beer already. So the pressure's off for the program then too.
The pocketbook.
Oh, they're going to love no matter what we do.
That's interesting.
We took advantage of, we do a board appreciation event every year where we invite our board alumni, people who have been a part of the board over, back 20 years, to our current board members. And we had to pivot that to Zoom. But that same kind of thing, Mary, is I sent an e-gift card, an e-Dairy Queen gift card, because it was 90 degrees.
Yeah, that's great.
And, just sent that out to everybody in advance so we could all at least come together and cool off. And the idea was, you know, the idea of bringing this group together again is these are the people who have been involved and have been supportive of the organization in a board capacity over time. So keeping them close and keeping them and giving them that kind of inside scoop, if you will. So that ice cream theme.
Perfect.
Never underestimate the impact of fun. Fun can really bring a unique.
And you can deliver fun through the internet. I mean,
there
you
you
can
go.
send things to people.
Yeah. There's some important relationship steps in that process too. And I think about Mary, I think about your example too, where and Sue and yours as well, the donor registers, then the donor also is getting this cool kit, and then they're taking it home. That whole process, they're thinking about you and your organization and the relationship they're having. And I think if you pick up an amazing food and cocktail kit, you're probably going to show up for the event because it's part of the whole experience. You're not just going to be like, well, I registered, but I don't feel like going. So if you like get through that whole process, you're just really solidifying that relationship.
Yeah, I think one thing that everybody, you know, keep in mind that when you go virtual, you really have the opportunity to reach so many more people. I know that, you know, somebody had said that they had gifts coming in from California and everything else, but, you know, it's also an opportunity, you know, if people weren't able to participate, you can still boom out that program and you really get quite a bang for your buck. So there's a lot of really good things that come out of the virtual piece that I think in parts we will continue doing.
I agree.
I think that there's just a lot of opportunity to reach so many more people and then for a length of time too. So yeah, I think we're going to continue in some form, no matter what the future shapes up to be. We're going to do some virtual type, more of it anyway.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I said this earlier when we were previously chatting about looking at an event now as a campaign, not a singular one. You know, you've got that lead up time for people that you can be sharing your stories to a whole new audience who might not have otherwise bought a ticket to an event. The event is like opening up a letter, and it's just that it's being told to you as opposed to you reading it. And then it gives you legs to be able to do it, to continue to fundraise after the event. So I think the best counsel that I had during this whole learning process, and I don't even want to use the word pivot anymore. I think when we all started to spin, and was to really change my thinking of the one and done to a campaign. And I think that's just been a really critical change in how to think about what it is that we're doing today, especially when it comes to the utilization of any type of event platform fundraising.
Yeah.
Trisha's asking an interesting question of if we may not go back to big ticket in-person events. And for us, ours is not a paid event. It's the come to the free lunch 1 hour, we make the pitch. What this feels like to me is when online came into our world, and we're like, oh, now we have to do print mailings and online presence. So it was double work, and we figured out how to create efficiencies in that. And what I'm hearing universally from particularly board members and committee members is they loved the repurposed video and being able to share that with their friends. So even if we go back to a live event, I know I'm going to have that highly scripted little bit pieces that can go out in video.
Yeah.
So it's a yes and moving forward. A little more work.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, the virtual events, I will say, we have found have not been any cheaper to produce.
No.
Wow.
And potentially the same, if not a little more. So because of all of the extra players and the technology. And so to your point, Kit, I think going forward, I can't wait to be live again in some capacity, but there will always have to be now an element of virtual that follows or leads up, which I ultimately makes events, you know, it will affect the bottom line.
Yeah.
And will affect kind of how we budget for them going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, you've all clearly been adapting, and I'm wondering, beyond maybe what you've already shared, does anyone have any learnings that they're absolutely feeling strongly about, learnings over the last 6 months? Like what's in your heart right now that you know that you want to share with the MACC network?
For us, I think just it was a reinforcement of the appreciation that a personal touch does. You know, we had a capacity issue with working from home and printing thank you letters with the tax exemption and everything else. So it's like we've been writing so many personal thank yous, and we've been getting personal notes back. I mean, when you're getting thank yous for a thank you, that's pretty fun. So I think for us, I mean, what's going to change forever for me is going to be just that really focus on that personal touch, the phone call, you know, versus just a thank you letter or something like that. I think that you get so much more return on that. So that's something that we're going to just continue to embrace moving forward more.
Other recommendations from other panelists?
You know what?
For me, the recommendation is really about the story and being able to have that at the ready and timely, and the right story for the right audience at the right time.
Another piece of learnings, I think, for Interfaith, again, because we have so many volunteers, is when you're in that virtual platform, whatever that might look like, you have to really think hard on how you want to use your volunteers, because it is a very staff-driven initiative. And the thing that I learned is it's still important to include your volunteers in some of the decision-making process, because they become your ambassadors to be able to expand their network into that unlimited audience. So it's really important that you're thoughtful with your volunteers and you include them as you're progressing through this, because you want them to ultimately go out to their community to tell people who are telling their community, and so on and so forth. So you can really tap into what I call the unlimited audience. And I think your volunteers are a critical path to get there.
Yeah, and that's my takeaway, Lori, is continue to ask questions of volunteers and donors. A foundation staff person created a framework that worked for me, is that what we're experiencing is a lot like a weather-related event, like a hurricane response or a tornado response. And so you have your crisis phase that we all were dealing with. And now we're in a new phase of, this is starting the rebuild. How long will this go? Oh, it's not going to change for a while. And as I asked our potential hosts for the house party questions, their appetite for Zoom meetings is a lot less than it was in April. And I think that will continue to shift. You know, maybe something will be very different in next April. But this, you know, I'm stealing ideas from all of you guys on the food and the fun, and how do you make another Zoom meeting fun for those of us who are on them all day long. Different for our retirees, but for the worker bees, it's not so much fun to come to.
Yeah.
But
I'd like to ask if others, and I'd love for the participants to chime in on this too. I mean, how have you been meeting with your donors? I mean, to me, it's like, you know, I mean, phone calls, of course, have increased in our world, but you know, that face-to-face, I mean, Sue, you mentioned that you're pulling, you know, your car in to a parking lot. I have not done that yet, but I like it. It was pretty neat, especially if they slip an envelope your way through the window. But I just was wondering.
I'll get out of the car to accept that.
I just am wondering how others are like, you know, having that personal connection with donors, because like some of our larger donors through the event that we had, I mean, we had an opportunity to invite them to participate by helping us with the video or things like that. We did a trivia afterwards and some educational cocktail mixing and stuff before the actual program. But I'm like challenged myself with like trying to connect creatively to the donors. I'd love to hear what others are doing with that.
We have about a minute if somebody
Okay.
wants to tackle that for Mary, and then we could.
I want to know.
Yeah.
I've been surprised. You can see the new building that we're building behind us. My older donors have said yes to in-person tours, which freaked me out. But we've been outside and we wear masks, so we're not doing a lot of them. But it's really surprised me that they've said yes so enthusiastically. We tend to only do it with couples, you know, existing pods.
Yeah.
So it's horribly inefficient.
Yeah. Thank you. Brianna, do you have any final words of wisdom?
Well, I would like to add to that, you know, a little bit about how we've had to shift things, and we've worked with our community partners. We have a huge faith partner network that has supported PRISM as volunteers and as donors. And so one way that we've had to be more creative to give them opportunity, but also for us to be with them physically, is we reached out to our contacts at those different faith partners and asked them for our Back to School Success program if they would be a place to collect supplies and then set up for the groups that used to come into PRISM, you know, like Target might have 3 or 4 people or different things like that, to come to those locations and pack backpacks, which turned out to be amazing because, first of all, we should have been doing this anyway because we didn't have to have all the inventory at PRISM and figure out how to do that. But then still give an opportunity for individuals to feel comfortable to engage with us in person.
Yeah, wonderful. Boy, I could talk to this panel all day. The learning just goes on, and we've had some great comments and questions from the audience as well. Hang in there with us. We've just got a couple minutes left to wrap things up, but my first thing is to thank our panelists, Brianna, Kit, Lori, Mary, and Sue. Wow, powerful women in the MACC network making it happen with some incredible organizations, and you really are inspiring me. Thank you so much. And I as well will continue to envision Sue driving around town, grabbing envelopes, and that works.
I'm gonna join her.
Yeah.
Drive by.
And of course, we greatly appreciate everyone's participation and attendance and being a part of this conversation. We want to ask attendees to keep feeding us your ideas for what you want to Zoom about with your MACC network. These have been really great opportunities to convene and get together. And watch for some really exciting innovations too that MACC is doing and that Clara has been working on. We've got some new tools coming up to continue to work together as effectively as a network. So I mentioned the after session e-goodie bag, that'll be coming your way shortly. The panel has shared some things to include in that. And I just want to say thank you again. This brings us to the close of today's Zoom, and we just want to wish everyone to be well and best wishes. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank